네, 안녕하십니까. 제19회
Good morning. This is the third day of the World Ocean Forum 2025. So we will now move on to the International Politics and Maritime Power session. So in this session, and also as for the World Ocean Forum 2025, it is being broadcast live in both Korean and English on the official World Ocean Forum website and YouTube channel. You can also view presentation materials and participate in real-time Q&A by leaving comments on the official website. So once again, for interpretation, please note that channel 3 is for Korean and channel 4 is for English. And now we will begin the session on the international maritime powers. So, there was a lot of heated discussion yesterday, and I think this is the right time to talk about the international uncertainties. And also, in order to solve issues like climate, food, and energy, we believe that the solution or the key to the solution lies in the oceans. So through perspectives from naval affairs, diplomacy, shipping, shipbuilding, and fisheries, we aim to explore strategies for Korea's advancement as a true maritime nation. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor In-hyun Kim, Chair of the World Ocean Forum Organizing Committee and Professor Emeritus at Korea University of Law. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
여러분 반갑습니다.
Good morning, everybody. So I am the moderator of the International Ocean Politics session, and I am Professor In-hyun Kim. And I'm also the chair of the World Ocean Forum Organizing Committee. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the presenters and participants joining us both on-site and online from around the world despite your busy schedules. Throughout modern history, every nation that rose to global prominence achieved its prosperity through the sea. European nations such as the United Kingdom, Spain, Netherlands, and are all powerful maritime nations. And the United States, the biggest superpower in the current days, is also a maritime powerhouse. So we are able to see that the ocean politics hegemony is changing these days. So U.S. and China are leading the competition, and actually their ocean powers are gaining more traction and power as they increase their maritime armament. So when we talk about maritime powers, it's not only about maritime powers or naval powers, but that is not it. When we talk about it, there's the public sector and also the private sector, I believe. So the naval power and the Navy police, the ocean police power, that's the public side, and then shipping, ocean fisheries. I think that is the private sector of the ocean powers. So when we have power in both areas, then you are a true maritime power country. So the presenters today will probably give you presentations on regarding the public segment of the ocean power, and the panelists will be talking about the private segment of the ocean powers, like the shipping and fishing and so on. So now I would like to welcome Professor Jong-ho Lee, a distinguished professor at Hanbad National University, who will deliver the keynote speech. And the title is Strengthening Naval Maritime Power and Korea's Strategy in Northeast Asia. Professor Lee is a retired admiral who served as the 36th Chief of Naval Operations of the Republic of Korea Navy. So he's an expert in joint and maritime operations, having held key positions including Commander of Chief of Republic of Korea Fleet and several major staff roles in Navy headquarters. And he is teaching at the university now. So please welcome him with a big round of applause.
제동님 오셔서 발표 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
So, Admiral, please come up to the stage. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. So, I thought the moderator was going to introduce all the speakers and then I will have the chance to speak. So, I was waiting. Thank you. Anyway, nice to meet you. So, it's been about 6 months since I came to Busan, and it feels like home, smelling the scent of the sea, and it feels really refreshing, and I'm really happy to be here. So, today I'm going to talk about strengthening naval power and what Korea's strategy is to strengthen the naval power in this region. So, on the screen, you see a lot of ships on the sea, and this picture was taken in 2024. So in Hawaii, we had a Pacific Rim joint operations training, and this picture was taken then. And the scope of the training was really big, but what's most important about this is that in case of the impact training, we started to participate in that training for the first time in 1998 after being an observer for several years. And last year, our role was actually we were a deputy admiral. We had the position of the deputy admiral in the whole training, and it was the first time. So this position is not given easily to other countries. So it shows how stronger Korean Navy has become, and it shows how the U.S. believes that Korea is an important partner in this area. So now let me begin my presentation. So I will briefly introduce myself, and I will speak a bit about what naval power or maritime power is, and I will go over the maritime security environment, the current environment, and so I will also touch upon how other major Northeast Asian countries are strengthening their maritime power, and then I will briefly touch upon Korea's strategies to strengthen further our maritime powers. So to briefly introduce myself, I know the moderator has given me a kind introduction. I graduated from the Naval Academy, and I was in the Navy for more than 30 years, and I actually retired a few years ago. So actually, I was in the Navy for about 40 years, and now I'm a professor emeritus at Hanba National University, and also I'm an honorary president of the Korean Naval Science and Technology Society too. So what is maritime power? I'm sure you all know what the definition is, what it means, and there's a little bit of difference of the definition of maritime powers according to the scholars. So we may have several definitions, but I want to introduce the definition of maritime power that I like the most, which was quoted by Alfred T. Mahan. So he is a professor at the U.S. Navy. He was a professor at the Navy Academy in the U.S. So as it says, according to Alfred Mahan, the sea power is the comprehensive ability of a nation to use, control, and dominate the sea, a key element to determining its strength and prosperity. I think this is the best definition of maritime power, and I wanted to introduce this definition to you. So if you look at, we could see the importance of maritime power throughout the history. As you can see in the pictures, back in the Greek, the dawn of the brilliant civilization in Greece and Rome, it started from their strong maritime powers. And also the U.S. started to display its leadership as a superpowerhouse based on its strong naval powers. So it shows that having a strong navy gives a huge power to the nation, and also a nation with a strong naval strength has a large competitiveness. But the thing is, the current environment is not easy at all. So to give you a key word, it's full of war, conflicts, and crises and challenges these days. So you all know what's happening in the world these days. There are multiple wars going on, and there's a lot of military conflicts, there's a lot of uncertainties and instability throughout the whole world. And also, what's happening in the Northeast Asia. I think the situation is more serious in Northeast Asia. So the U.S.-China conflict is becoming more and more strengthened, and also China, Russia, North Korea are becoming more and more closely allied. And also in the case of Northeast Asia, there's always a conflict over maritime jurisdiction and ocean resources. So Northeast Asia, I think, holds multiple issues and challenges, and as much as it is important. So what about the Korean Peninsula, North Korea's nuclear weapons situation? And remember, Jung Kim mentioned in 2023 that they will have their navy armed with nuclear weapons too. It means that North Korea is set to strengthen its maritime power, and they want to show it off to the neighboring countries. So you could see that the situation in the Korean Peninsula is also aggravating, and this is a very important juncture, I think. And so we looked at the maritime security environment in the previous page. And so how are the major Northeast Asian countries responding in this situation? How are they strengthening their maritime powers? So I have prepared a map. And as you can see here, so we have like 3 lines for each country. So military power, number of vessels, and Navy personnel. And apart from North Korea, all these superpowers are among the top 10 military power. And also look at the number of Navy personnel. Well, U.S. is at the top, followed by China, Russia, and Japan is number 6, and Korea is number 5 in terms of military power. So you could see that a lot of Northeast Asian countries are seeking to strengthen their maritime power, and they are seeking, and actually they are accelerating, strengthening the Navy power. And also about 60% or 80% of the world's Navy power is actually concentrated in Northeast Asia. So the Navy forces are becoming larger. It's becoming more and more unmanned, and it's becoming more and more advanced. And another thing I wanted to mention is, well, as countries seek to expand their maritime influence based on naval power, we are also seeing some changes across the nations. If you look at China first, China has been promoting its One Belt, One Road initiative, and China is seeking to maintain and also expand that initiative, and also expanding maritime presence through militarization of artificial islands in South China Sea and installing structures in the West Seas. And so most of the military drills used to happen in the West Seas, but now it's moving to the East Seas and doing joint drills with Russia. So China is doing its best to expand its maritime powers, and it's the same for Russia. The Pacific Fleet Force in Vladivostok, that is being expanded. So Russia is using its Pacific Fleet forces to counter the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. And also, Russia is trying to preoccupy the Arctic routes. So they are doing military drills there, and they are setting up Arctic bases too. And it goes the same for Japan. So Japan is at the center of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. And based on its position in the Indo-Pacific collaborative framework, it is trying to strengthen its international maritime security cooperation, and it is increasing its defense spending. And also, Japan now has the ability to launch long-range strikes. And it goes the same for North Korea. They are reinforcing regime security and deterrence through the augmentation of nuclear and missile capabilities. And also, they are expanding their operations so they seek to have more influence over the region based on its maritime powers. So you could see a lot of Northeast Asian countries are putting in a lot of efforts to expand their powers over the seas. So under such circumstances, what is Korea seeking to do? So what is the direction Korea should take? So I think there's a lot of considerations for Korea. So there are things to be done internally or at the regional level too. And I just want to mention just a few things that Korea should focus on. First of all, as mentioned in the definition of the naval power or the maritime power, having a country who has the maritime power will succeed in the future. So therefore, a dedicated national strategic level organization should be set up quickly in Korea to oversee, coordinate, control, and integrate sea power. So it should not be like a minister of some ministry or the chief of staff taking the lead. It shouldn't be like that. So because then we could inevitably have silos. So we need to have a dedicated organization seeking to strengthen the sea power. And acknowledging the need to strengthen the sea power, the government needs to set up a dedicated organization that could take the lead and initiative in this regard. So I strongly insist on the government's building a dedicated organization. And also, I insist that we develop an advanced national maritime policy and strategy and achieve a transformative strengthening of sea power. Once again, all of these initiatives need to be taken by the government for it to gain momentum. So to give you an example, when I was a chief of staff, so the U.S. announced its Indo-Pacific strategy, and the Korean government, thought hard about how we can chip into that strategy. And actually, the sea power is necessary to take a big position in the Indo-Pacific strategy. And in order to do that, the Navy needs to take the lead. But the Navy was not able to take the lead and ask the government just to take the lead in building sea power. So the Navy had to keep on asking the government to build an organization, a dedicated organization, and the Navy kept on asking the government to give it the authority to take the lead. So third thing I insist is that we should integrate and systematically develop maritime community across Navy. And so here I want to talk a little bit about the Band of Brothers. people who know the sea, people who love the sea, people who use the sea, they share a sense of solidarity. And you need to have that level of solidarity in order for us to survive in this changing hegemony in the sea. We need to have a sense of community. So we need to become a band of brothers. We need to have a deep level of solidarity in order for us to be able to weather through the current challenges. So remember Hamlet said to be or not to be? So he was at a crossroad, right? So I think we are currently at that crossroad. We need to come together. And all the different like Navy and maritime organizations that are all fragmented now, they all need to form solidarity. So we need to have the support from the people, and also we need to have the leadership of the government too. And fourth, we need to upgrade tailored maritime security cooperation with neighboring countries and expand the scope of collaboration. And as the moderator had mentioned, so each company cannot win its own war. We need to form a team. So in security, economy, politics, we need to have a heightened level of cooperation. So there's a U.S.-Korea strategic relationship, the alliance. There's a lot of things happening, but I think this is the right time to revisit all the collaborative relationships and bodies. And we have to really think hard about how far we are going to enhance the collaborative frameworks and the bodies. Fifth, we need to develop Northeast Asia MDA, Maritime Domain Awareness, and establish a joint maritime security cooperation organization. If we want to develop something, if we want to implement something, it is very important that there is a leading organization. So the term MDA was first coined by the U.S. when the coal fleet was collapsed and when the 9/11 terrorist attack happened. So the U.S. coined this maritime domain awareness concept so that they could be ahead in terms of acknowledging what may happen or the potential threats. So I think Korea needs to have our version of the MDA that is suitable for what is currently going on. And I think it's also very important that we create a maritime security organization very soon. So there's an IFC, right? So the IFC oversees the potential ocean threats. They share alerts, and also they make sure that the member countries counteract together. So there are many organizations in other regions of the world, but I don't really see this kind of organization in Northeast Asia. So I think it is very urgent that we set up this security organization, ocean security organization in Northeast Asia, so that we can, if necessary, collaboratively respond to the threats and challenges in this region. And the sixth argument is regarding MASCA and MRO, Arctic routes, and joint maritime patrols. So we need to identify and develop momentum for exchanges and cooperation for common interests, utilizing those instruments that I have mentioned. So the public, military, private, academia could all participate in these efforts. And if we all join hands to enhance common interests, then we will be able to gain momentum. We'll be able to enhance and contribute to the peace and stability of the region. So I know there are multiple efforts going on at this moment too, but I think it is now time to conjoin those efforts and make it more harmonized. And also, I insist that we expand participation in multinational forces and international peacekeeping operations and enhance contributions. And also, lastly, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of enhancements to be made in the laws and regulations side, and also there are diplomatic efforts to be enhanced too. So if we talk about diplomacy, are we going to provide an arbitrary rule? So I think we need to find a balance of the and also enhancements of the existing laws, regulations, and the diplomatic efforts. I'm sure there will be more discussions followed in the panel discussion. So in conclusion, naval power is a key instrument of national security and prosperity. But once again, a strong sea power must be supported by integration and cooperation among elements of the maritime community, balanced development, and effective efforts. So we need to have that band of brothers mindset. And also, synergy can be created through the government's situational awareness and proactive policy implementation, along with public understanding and support. So having a strong sea power will allow us to contribute to the peace and prosperity of the region and the world. So I hope this becomes an opportunity to rethink about all of this. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee from Hanbat University. And he talked about, in an age of uncertainty, strengthening maritime power as the key. And he emphasized the importance of the strengthening naval power as well as maritime power. Thank you very much. Please give him another big hand. Next, we will hear from Mr. An Young-jip, advisor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, who will give a presentation on the maritime power of major nations and its implications for Korea. Mr. An studied political science at Seoul National University and the University of Pennsylvania. During his distinguished diplomatic career, he served in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Nigeria, and later as ambassador to Singapore and Greece. So he has a long-standing relationship with the seas. And after his retirement, he taught as an invited professor at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies and is currently serving as an advisor at the Center for Diplomatic History at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. As introduced, my name is An Young-jip. It's a great pleasure to meet you. And to be honest, I don't know much about the oceans and the seas. However, I used to work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as introduced, I used to work in Singapore, in Greece, and the United Kingdom, which have a close relationship with the oceans, and I had exchange with the shipbuilding and the maritime industries. So today, I would like to talk about the maritime power of major nations and its implications for Korea briefly. And regarding the maritime power, many scholars analyzed this and presented theories. And let me introduce two of them. We have Mommsen, who is a German historian, and he authored History of Rome, volumes 1 to 3, and he's the only historian ever to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. So he argued that Rome defeated the maritime power Carthage. And Rome was originally a traditional land power. However, they won a war over Carthage thanks to its naval victory in the First Punic War. And it was achieved by installing the bridge on ships. And during the Second Punic War, Hannibal used the Alps to go to Rome because Rome was in control of the sea. So it prevented a direct route. And when Scipio launched a naval attack on Carthage, Hannibal was compelled to return home. So Rome defeated Carthage by building the maritime power. And as Professor Lee just said, we have another famous person who is Mr. Mahan. And he authored very well-known books, so he became a global idol. And the two well-known books are The Influence of Sea Power Upon History and The Influence of Sea Power Upon the French Revolution and Empire. It emphasized that the sea power control and determine the national fate. And he explained how Britain rose to global dominance, and he interpreted the Napoleonic Wars as a confrontation between sea power and land power, and Napoleon's defeat stemmed from his lack of naval strength. So the U.S. decided to build and expand the U.S. Navy. And for securing Panama, Hawaii, and the Philippines. And his ideas influenced the leaders in other countries. The sea power and command of the seas are the essential foundations of a great power status. However, Hartford Mackinder presented the theory of land power, so these are two opposing ideas. And Halford emphasized that the dominance in Eurasia will determine the national influence. However, Mr. Mahan gave an opposing idea, and he was an admiral, and he visited the Great Britain, and Queen Victoria invited him directly to her dinner to listen to his opinions and ideas. So he was that famous back then. And this is the story of China. So there was the Ming and Qing dynasties, and China experienced the decline of national power, and it is apparently related to the maritime power. So after Zheng He's maritime expeditions to the South Sea, for different reasons, the Ming dynasty implemented the maritime prohibition policy. The sea route was all lost because of this policy, and it resulted in decreased tax revenues and rampant smuggling and rising defense costs. And in the early Qing dynasty, the Chenggong built resistance forces. So his foundation was around Taiwan. So the Qing dynasty had the maritime ban until the Opium War. And it resulted in direct clashes with Western powers, and it caused a decline in China's international standing, and ultimately led to semi-colonization by Western powers and aggression from maritime power Japan. And China took lessons from this policy, so now they have an assertive maritime policy because they learned from history. That is why China has the Maritime Silk Road Initiative and make efforts to dominate the South China Sea. And this is how global maritime hegemony has evolved. So it started with Portugal, followed by Spain, the Netherlands, and the British and the United Kingdom. And Portugal even expanded its dominance up to Macau, and it built the trade route-based maritime empire. And what about Spain? They had the New World discovery and colonized many parts and the American continent. And they connected Manila and Mexico and Spain, so they built a Manila-Acapulco trade network. And next, the Netherlands. They had the Dutch East India Company, which monopolized the Asian spice trade. And Amsterdam became the global financial hub. So it built a trade and finance-centered maritime empire. And the United Kingdom had the empire in early 1700s. And it built the maritime industry in general, and it dominated 60 to 70% of shipping, and it maintained a maritime order under Pax Britannica for a long time. And after the Second World War, the US became the next maritime power. And when we explain the US and Soviet rivalry, people describe that and compare it as the struggle between Leviathan and Behemoth. And Leviathan is a sea monster, and Behemoth is a land beast written in the Bible. And there was the Cold War, and Behemoth is based on the land, and Leviathan is based on the maritime power, and it was a liberal country. And the US won the war through its economic strength and maritime dominance. And recently, we are witnessing the US and China rivalry. And the US has an overwhelming dominance after the Second World War. However, now the reversal in US-China naval power has since occurred. There could be different figures for that. However, U.S. Navy has about approximately 290 to 296 combat vessels, and they are building 7 to 12 new ships. However, the Chinese Navy has 370 to 395 combat vessels, and they build several dozen new ships. Of course, the quality might be better in the US. However, when we look at the simple trend, there is a clear reversal in US and China naval power. This is not confined to the Navy vessels. It is the same for the merchant ships. So in case of the commercial shipbuilding, the US builds only 1 to 5 large commercial ships per year. However, China holds a 70.6% share of the new ship market today. And when we look at the container shipping company, the US was the first case to have such a global shipping company. However, once prominent carriers such as Sealand and APL were sold, so U.S. lost its maritime power to a great deal, while China is expanding its dominance. So the U.S. is now anxious about its declining shipbuilding power, and the U.S. has visited Hanwha Ocean and Hyundai, HD Hyundai recently. The two of the U.S. Navy secretaries visited those companies, and Korean company won an order from the U.S. to provide repair and maintenance on 3 Navy ships in the U.S. And President Trump talked to President Lee after his election about the support in the shipbuilding industry. And after all, the Hanwha Ocean signed an agreement to acquire Philly Shipyard in the U.S. at the acquisition price of $100 million US. And in August this year, President Lee attended the naming ceremony for the multiple-purpose national security vessel, State of Maine. And the Korean government has been leveraging shipbuilding cooperation as a key bargaining chip in tariff negotiations with the U.S. And it plans to establish a $150 billion investment fund to support this program. And what about China? China is very sensitive about this measure, so it has imposed sanctions against it. So now let me talk about the importance of a maritime power as observed in the field of diplomacy. Half of the world's population lives in coastal areas today, and these regions generate 2/3 of global wealth and global GDP. And in terms of global communications and transportation, over 90% of it depend on undersea cables. And maritime transport accounts for more than 80% of global trade, according to UNCTAD statistics. And in Korea, over 90% of exports and imports are carried by sea already. And the maritime sector is a deeply interconnected value chain involving shipbuilding, ports, logistics, and legal services. And we had the Hanjin shipping crisis when I was working in Greece. And I was very disappointed in Korea back then. So there was a strong complaints from Greek ship owners. And the government might have thought that we can just get the Hanjin shipping out of the market. However, many of the cargo owners imposed a ban on Hanjin shipping companies' vessels. And what we did was to negotiate so that Hanjin shipping vessels could enter those countries' ports. But I didn't like this case, and I truly felt the importance of the maritime power back then. And let me talk about the IMO. And Korea has been continuously elected as a Category A Council member for a long time, but we have to make constant efforts to maintain the status. And active participation in individual committees is also very crucial for the future. So, at the end of the day, for Korea, strengthening maritime power is indispensable to both political and economic security. So now let us look at the patterns of maritime power development among leading maritime nations. And they have shown active participation in international organizations that shape the global maritime order. And as key members of the International Maritime Organization, leading maritime nations work to maintain the existing order. And in case of the UK, they maintain control and influence through maritime norms and institutions, and Greece leverages dominance in global shipping through ownership of a vast merchant fleet. And Singapore maximizes its geostrategic advantage, and China expands its influence across all maritime sectors. And Japan sustains a traditional strengths in shipbuilding, even though their influence has gone down. And Taiwan pursues a selective and concentrated approach, focusing on what they do better than other countries. And South Korea builds on its world-class shipbuilding industry while striving to extend its capabilities across the broader maritime domain. And countries tend to expand their dominance into the new fields where they didn't have strong points before. And let me focus on the United Kingdom. They have the headquarters of the IMO, so they have soft power, and they don't build any ships anymore. However, they still have unrivaled influence in global maritime dispute resolution because they host the London Maritime Arbitrators Association, and Admiralty Court and Commercial Court. And in case of the English common law, it has been expanded in maritime affairs. And let me talk about Greece now. And it has the world's largest merchant fleet. And what I felt when I was working in Greece was that they approach ship ownership as a form of asset management, and they take a sell and respect approach, and it is very professional, and it raises capital through listings on the New York Stock Exchange, and they have a close relationship with raw material companies. And in case of Hyundai Shipbuilding, I visited many of the launching ceremonies, and after the launching, they just transferred the ship to the charter company. And Greece has a family-owned business structure, which enables rapid decision-making and strong bargaining power in the new shipbuilding process, and it exerts influence in the IMO and international shipping organizations. And when I was working in Greece, I was asked to deliver a message to Secretary General Lim from the Ship Owners Association. And let me talk about Singapore. It has the world's leading bunkering port. And not only that, it has a center for law because it has a strength in maritime arbitration, and it has an innovative maritime ecosystem. So especially PSA has a huge influence in the market. And it also has a strength in ship repair and marine engineering. And let me move on to China. And based on its world's #1 shipbuilding industry, it is exerting its influence in the general maritime industries. And out of 10 world's top container ports, 7 are located in China. And China engages assertively in IMO committees, and it is aggressively expanding in maritime law and arbitration. So it is expanding global influence of Shenzhen Court of International Arbitration and CTEC as well. So in the field of arbitration, China would like to dominate the global stage. Japan is a traditional maritime power. Of course, in terms of the shipbuilding industry, it is lagging behind. However, it still has strengths in specialized and high value-added vessels, and Japanese shipping companies continue to be globally competitive. And they have close ties with the general trading companies in Japan. So they have a strength where Korea doesn't. And as an outsider, it looks like Japan sustains a robust ship financing system. They have a close connection with the banks. And instead of high-risk speculative ventures, they focus on sustainable and long-term investment. And it is also playing an active role in IMO committees. And I remember one of the colleagues whose name was Setsumono, and he was a public officer, but he was dispatched to IMO, and he later became the Secretary General of the organization. And now it's time to talk about Taiwan. It has powerful container companies, but at the same time, it has invested in container yard, and even though it has a family-owned tradition, it has a professional management practice at the same time. And this is Korea's strategic direction. We have the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans in Busan. However, we need to establish a maritime governance hub in Busan. So we need to build an integrated maritime ecosystem and control tower connecting the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries and public and private banks, classification, shipping companies, and many other stakeholders. And we need to expand the national ship ownership instead of focusing on building ships only. And we need to develop global maritime legal capabilities. And we also need innovation and logistics partnerships. So we need to have a joint R&D with universities and companies. And to become a true maritime power, Korea should participate in rule-making, manage its own assets, and achieve integrated development across all maritime sectors. And let me talk about the areas requiring urgent action. First, we need to strengthen activities within the IMO. So having the Secretary General is not important. We need to support the placement of Korean professionals more actively. And for example, Panama and the Marshall Islands, these are very small nations. However, they have an active participation of representatives in committees. And now the Secretary General is actually from Panama. And we need to build a systematic international network. The Korea Maritime and Ocean University need to have a student exchange program. And the ENG University in Chios Island, I visited there. And most of the European countries sent their students to these universities. And I also saw a Chinese student there. And they could have a lifelong networking by studying there. So we have to do the same. We have to dispatch our students there. And we need to further develop the World Ocean Forum to become a world-class forum like the ones in Oceania. And I used to work in an overseas missions, so we need to make active use of them. The maritime clusters maritime clusters should visit those countries and have a communication through the overseas missions. So you have to make active requests through the overseas missions. So when I was working in Singapore, the Overseas Construction Association invited me. And they asked me to do many things, and it helped my job because I could provide proper support as well. So this should be more actively utilized. And we have to recruit and develop financial and logistics experts. The shipping industry is not a simple product, and vessels should be managed as assets. And we need to establish a foundation for maritime legal services. So we need to launch the Korea Maritime Arbitration Board and an international maritime court. This is not just building a court, but instead of battling over the location of the court, we can have a specialized division within the High Court already existing in Korea. And we can invite international experts to these organizations so that we can have a global influence. And Singapore has a successful case of Chamber of Maritime Arbitration. And we need organic integration between shipbuilding and shipping industries. And in case of Greece, and ship owners, they look lazy. They come to the office very late and they just have coffee. But in the morning, they always look at the market trend. And they look at the cargo volume and crude oil price, metal price. And they just check all these indicators. And they have coffee and they enjoy lunch. And in the afternoon, they make major decisions. However, this kind of culture is quite important. We have to nurture the commercial intelligence team separately. And we need to embrace advancements in digital trade, smart ports, port security, and carbon emissions management, because green shipping and data and supply chain stability will be key to the future maritime supremacy. And last week, President Trump in the US had an announcement on greenhouse gas emission, and the decision was delayed for a year. I don't think this is sustainable. I believe that this is a more ideal approach we have to take. So after all, sea power determines the destiny of nations. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
네,
Thank you for your insightful presentation. So it was very insightful, and usually, the presentation materials are made based on books, but Mr. An's presentation was based on his experience. So it was very valuable. So let's give him another round of applause. And now we will move on to the next presentation. So next, Dr. Hee-Chul Yang, Director of the Ocean Law and Policy Institute at Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology, will present on the topic maritime law issues in Northeast Asia. Mr. Yang, Dr. Yang leads the Ocean Law and Policy Institute at KOIST, conducting extensive research on maritime boundary delimitation and deep seabed and so on, and he's also an advisor to various government ministries. He was awarded an Order of Science and Technology Merit, and please welcome him with a big hand. Nice to meet you. So now that I'm here, I'm not really able to see the audience because of light. Well, I do have some time limit, and we've had really great macro presentations before me now. So I will omit what is overlapping, and I will try to cover the key issues in Northeast Asian maritime law. So the Northeast Asian Maritime Order is changing rapidly, and as mentioned by the two speakers, there's a big competition regarding who's going to become the superpower. So that actually determines the leader of this area. So that is why that kind of hierarchy in the sea power applies to the maritime orders. So if you see the conflicts, sometimes the conflict actually happens in other areas, but they have some ripple impact to Korea too. And these kind of international issues not only have an impact on the Korean Peninsula, they also change the characteristics of the elements in this area too. So we have to pay a very close attention to what is happening in the international seas to know what may happen in our region too. So if you look at what had happened historically, usually it was about who wanted to take power in the regional seas. So recently we have seen the issues regarding the Yellow Sea, and also I think the conflict will move on to the East Sea, the East China Sea. So we believe that the issues will expand to the wider range of the China seas. So we are all working level people. So I would like to cover some of the issues that I have actually encountered before. So think about the agenda we dealt with 10 years ago. They all became trivial issues after 10 years now. So if you look at the issues that we have to address now, these are the kind of issues where if we make a little mistake, the traffic in the East Seas and the Yellow Seas and so on could all be impacted. And also what's important is in the case of the Korea Peninsula, the sea traffic is much more complicated than the other areas because we not only are we surrounded by the powerhouses, we are also sharing a border with North Korea too. So that complicates the sea management issues. And also sometimes we have military issues and also non-military issues happening at the same time. So if you look at the right side table, there are many countries bordering the sea, and if we study how they have managed their seas, I think there could be some implication about how Korea should manage our sea in this area now, in this time now. So let's look at some of the issues that are happening. So as mentioned earlier, so the characteristics of the Korean Peninsula surrounding seas are changing. So first of all, the sea power is being redefined. So this part was covered by the two speakers. So I'll omit that part. But now focusing on the bottom right, you could see that we see some of the newly emerging countries that tend to have the sea power, and it seems that these countries tend to focus on how they could leverage science, science information and technology. So the U.S. and China, Japan are some of those countries showing those characteristics. So it is important for Korea to think about leveraging science and IT technology to strengthen our sea power too. Then let's look at the legal issues Korea is facing. So if you look at the sea boundaries, so this is the Korean Strait, and there is only a single line that was drawn by 1974, according to the Intercontinental Shelf Agreement. So it was about the waters, and actually this does not incorporate the EEZ. So ultimately, Korea does not have a very definite boundary in the seas. And according to the UNCLOS, basically all countries can assume rights to the 200 nautical miles of sea. But if all the countries draw their line at 200 nautical miles, then it is inevitable that conflicts arise between some countries. So we wanted to avoid that conflict. So that is why, if there is no limitation or Korea set up a regulation so that we do not do any fishing activities outside the median line. But then that is not the case of China. So the black line is the median line that Korea has drawn, but now the China is saying that we have rights up to 200 nautical miles. So that is why there's some overlapping of the seas. And it's the same between Japan and Korea. So the conflicts arise on the seas around the Korean peninsula because of these issues. So the Japan, Korea, and China have different definitions of drawing the boundaries between the seas. So every year, Korea conducts negotiations regarding the seas and the boundaries. And since 2015, Korea has been conducting Director General level meetings with China. And we have 13 DG level meetings and 2 deputy minister level meetings. But it's not the case with Japan. After 2010, a periodical EEZ meeting has been discontinued. And also, since 2016, the Korea-Japan fishing agreement, the negotiation has been discontinued too. And next, I'm sure you have seen this a lot. Japan has suddenly installed a buoy towards the Korean seas. So regarding this, we gave warnings that all the vessels passing by should be careful. They should not enter the Korean seas. And we also gave warning to the Chinese government too, but the warnings were disregarded. So the buoys were installed there. So Korea actually set up our own buoy in the counterpart region. So that is what happened in 2018. And also another thing is that China every year has been launching satellites on the sea. So before, they used to launch satellites on a barge vessel, but there are not many countries that launch satellites on the seas, maybe Russia, China, and the US. But anyway, China recently, in 2023, launched a vessel dedicated to satellite launches. And with using that vessel, China has launched a huge commercial satellite. And we believe that this kind of activities will happen more often now that they have this launch vessel. But there's a risk of the vessel coming into our seas. So we need to find a diplomatic solution to this issue. And the fourth matter that I would like to mention is this is mentioned a lot at the national investigation these days. So since 2018 to 2024, a deep sea aquaculture farm has been set up in the middle of the sea. So as you could see, the scale is quite large, and the purpose is to cultivate and nurture salmon. So why does China keep on going into the deep sea? Unlike the other seas, in case of the Yellow Sea, there are some cold water areas in the Yellow Sea, the deep sea of the Yellow Sea, and it is a really good environment for various fish species. So China wants to do fishing in the deep sea area where there's a lot of fish species. So that means that there's a big possibility that China will keep on marching towards the Korean peninsula. And also, in order to manage these aqua farms in the deep seas, China set up this new management platform, the Deep Sea Aqua Farm Management Platform. And so our Ministry of Foreign Affairs made a strong criticism about that, but China is not really budging. So they are saying that this is a drilling facility. And so actually, according to the international laws, there are some activities that should not be conducted in other countries' seas, and drilling actually is part of one of those activities forbidden by the international laws. So through multiple channels, we are condemning the Chinese government that they should stop and dismantle this facility. And also there's a Japan-Korea issue too. So you will probably all know the Joint Continental Shelf Development Agreement. So this agreement is supposed to last for 50 years at the least, according to the agreement. However, it seems that Japan wants to discontinue or terminate this agreement because, well, some meaningful countermeasures have been taken, but the thing is that Japan and Korea has changed their respective perspectives regarding the continental shelf. Because it seems that the two countries have different views regarding what's going to happen with this area after that 50 years have expired. So China is already operating the petrochem facility in this area, and all the produced petrochem products are already shipped to China. So once this Korea-Japan development agreement expires, then who is going to claim rights in this area? So that is something we have to think about in advance. So this is how the perspectives have changed in this area. So the orange area is where Korea and China both want to claim the rights. And if you follow what Japan is doing, we could actually get some idea of what Japan wants to do in the East China Sea. And actually, the Korea's East Sea, Donghae, is also a complicated matter too, because there is conflict over the fishing rights between Korea and Japan. And actually, the thing is that China is moving into the East Sea of Korea to fish, and they are literally taking all the fish in the East Sea. About 1,000 vessels are advancing into the Korea's East Sea. But the problem is, it's not so China taking all the fish resources is one problem. But then the second issue is that China is actually violating Korea's right to fish in the East Sea of the Korean Peninsula. And there's another issue. There's a very sensitive area in the East Sea. So this is this area, there is no maritime boundary. So there is a matter of who has jurisdiction, and who is going to enforce which law in this area when a Chinese vessel or a Japanese vessel come in here to fish. So those are some of the legal issues that we find in Korean seas. Now, let's talk about something else. When an issue happens, then what kind of issues may arrive in the regional seas? First is the Cadiz issue. So in case of China already, and annually they are sending their warplanes to the EC, the Tonghe in China. And currently we see that China is expanding their drills to conduct jointly with Japan, with Russia. And also we have seen Chinese unmanned warplanes in the EC too. And another thing is that how is China going to operate in the East Sea? And this is a document showing evidence of that China is very determined in moving into the East Sea. And this actually, so basically, China is seeking to use 2 Russian ports to operate in the East Sea. And this is a new type of approach that has never been seen before. And then there is the Taiwan Strait. So of course, this is the issue of U.S. and China, and China and Taiwan. But actually, that has impact on us because of international trade. China and U.S. have different interpretation of the use of the Taiwan Strait, and actually that's going to have a huge impact on Korea's trade in the future. So last year, there has been a big conflict between the U.S. and China regarding China Strait, but my personal view is that that was just nonsense. But in that nonsensical argument, we could find the hidden clues about how 2 countries are regarding the Taiwanese Strait. And also, the issues in the Taiwanese Strait is serious because it has impact on our passage to the Arctic routes. So we need to pay attention of the developments there. Another issue we need to take interest in is about the routes. So recently we have seen a lot of Chinese warplanes entering and also vessels entering our territorial sea. So you see the areas marked in yellow and marked in red. The red area, they have a specific purpose. It says we're going to do some like shooting drills, so don't come in. But in case of the yellow colors, it has no set purpose, but then they said nobody should fly over that area. So China has set up its Coast Guard Act and the Maritime Transport Safety Act in 2021. And if we see what China is doing now, we believe that more areas in the territorial sea will prohibit other vessels from entering without setting a set purpose or a reason. So this is a patrol vessel that has been launched by China. And we need to pay attention that this is a quite big vessel that has been launched by China to do patrol duties in the regional seas. And we need to pay attention of how that impacts China's relationship with Japan. So there's a lot of things happening here, and there are military threats and also non-military threats in this region that may affect Korea. And we are seeing some gradual increase of those non-military threats too. That's what we need to think about. And the security environment is not that easy either. So there are some invisible, unpredicted elements of threats newly introducing in this region. And think about the sea that we have to control in the future. We should not only control the nearby seas, but actually we have to expand our perspective to widen our coverage to cover the regional seas too. And that is the concept of MDA, as mentioned by the previous speaker. So you could see that our neighboring countries are strengthening their maritime controls. One good example is China, and they are expanding their controls, and also the technologies are developing at an unimaginable speed. We talked about the international laws earlier. So we have to think about. So I mentioned a lot of disputes that affect the peninsula law, and actually they should be governed by the international laws. So we also have to think about how we are going to resolve the disputes if a dispute should happen in the international seas. So there are new agreements, and in line with the newly developing circumstances, new international laws are being developed too. So actually, Korea's situation is not that favorable. So we did an internal research in Korea. So we have only 15 experts in Korea to provide advice and expertise regarding the maritime laws. You could see China has 145 and Japan has 86, so it is very few, and it is worrisome. And even the professor who used to teach maritime law at universities, they take other jobs after retirement because in the legal framework as a whole, the ocean law, the maritime law only takes up a very small portion. So thank you very much for listening.
네, 감사합니다. 지금
Thank you very much. We have listened to 3 presentations, and we are going to take a short 10-minute break before moving on to the panel discussion. Please give another big hand to Mr. Yang, our last presenter. Thank you very much. We are going to begin the panel discussion in 10 minutes.
하나 둘 하나 둘 둘 하나 둘 둘. 하나 둘.
네, 잠시 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 잠시 후 저희 30분부터 발제 토론 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 참석자분들께서는 입장하셔서 착석 부탁드리겠습니다. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will soon begin the panel discussion, so I would like to ask everyone to come inside and take a seat. 네, 저희 30분부터 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 참석자분들께서는 입장하셔서 착석 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 모두 입장하신 뒤에 저희 발제자, 토론자 그리고 좌장님까지 무대 위로 모시고 바로 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 착석 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 잠시 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 저희 이제 패널 토론 진행하도록 하겠습니다.
We will now move on to the panel discussion. So please come into the venue and be seated.
Simultaneous interpretation. Please set to channel number 4 for English. 네, 그러면 저희
All right, so we will now move right on to the panel discussion. So the speakers and also the moderator and the panelists, please come up to the stage and please welcome them with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. So let's have, your names are on the table, so please go to where your names are. So Once again, please welcome everybody on the stage with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. And now I will hand over the microphone to the moderator.
Hyun Kim. It is my great honor to serve as a moderate before distinguished participant. I would like to speak in Korean rather than English, reflecting almost all of participants are Korean. However, you can get the English translation. 자, 지금부터
Okay, now we will begin the panel discussion. So as mentioned at the beginning, so the sea power, the maritime power is not just the naval power. So unlike the other sessions in the discussion time, we would also like to talk about the maritime power that is connected to the private sector. So we have four very important panelists here. First, we have Mr. Changjin Kim of Southeastern Region Headquarters, Korea Shipping Association. And we have Ms. Hyun-Hei Shin, Korea Overseas Fisheries Association Executive Director. And we have Kyu-jong Choi, the Executive Vice Chairman of Ko-Shipa. And we have Mr. Jong-tae Kim, President of Korean Marine Officers Association. So these four people represent the oversee the fishing, fisheries, shipping, and shipping plants, the private sector. So I would just pass the mic to the respective panelists. So the panelists are requested to tell us about how your area of business is related with maritime power. Hello, I am Changjin Kim of Korea Shipping Association. So there are 2,400 members in our association, and there are about 4,000 vessels in Korea's maritime business, and about 96.7% of total exports is transported through ocean. So I think we play a very important part in the Korean economy. So one of the most important, so maritime transport is very important in setting up Korea's security framework and to deal with various conflicts, and also in developing the Korean economy. So after listening to the three presentations, I was able to think about how transport business is related to the sea power. And also based on the three presentations that we have heard, I thought that it is very important that we have a dedicated organization to provide some advices and recommendations so that Korea can enhance the sea power. And also there has to be some so there has to be like a overarching network that covers the security issues and the Navy issues and the security issues. And also there was also a recommendation during the presentation that we need to have like a like approach too. We need to have a maritime organization that is dedicated to support and lead all the necessary initiative. And also there was some recommendation that we need to revise our maritime laws and regulations in line with the developments in the global stage. So maritime transportation is really important in terms of strengthening our sea power. And I believe that it is important to set up a combined network, a comprehensive network that oversees shipping, transport, strategy, economy, finance, and everything. And after hearing the presentations, then I questioned to myself, which organization in the current government may assume that role? Because if you look at the current Ministry of Fisheries, Oceans and Fisheries, there's a logistics team and the maritime environment preservation team, the shipping team. But we have to think about the Navy power, and also we also have to we need to have a team that actually addresses the challenges and the conflicts that happen on the seas too. And I know there is currently an organization dedicated to do that. But I agree with one of the professors' opinion that a dedicated organization should be set up outside of the government. And also I started to wonder whether there's any case in other countries where we could benchmark.
Good.
Thank you. So it would be a question to Mr. An Young-jip. Maybe you can answer the question later. And let us move on to the next panelist, Executive Director Shin Hyun-hae of the Korea Overseas Fisheries Association. You can emphasize the importance of the overseas fisheries industry, and you can also discuss the three presentations. Thank you, Professor. And we have uncertainty and super uncertainty in the current theme of the forum. And I believe that uncertainty is truly everywhere. The international order is shaken, and we have unexpected events developing, and the maritime power will determine the future as introduced by three presenters. And the maritime involves the utilization and control of the capacity and having an influence. And I believe that it is closely related to the overseas fisheries, because we have crew members, and fisheries and port and logistics and diplomacy are all encompassed in overseas fisheries. That is why the maritime power plays an important role in overseas fisheries. That's what I felt. However, we are dealing with the port and logistics and the maritime industries in general. So I would like to focus on the overseas fisheries through my discussion. First of all, the overseas fisheries is related to export and food security, making a contribution to the maritime economy. And since 1957, we went to the faraway sea. And it was all about human and sea, connecting the food and human, because the sea is the location which makes our crew members isolated. But they have made a contribution to the service for the public by providing food for them. And we have 4D vessels which are involved in joint projects, and we have about 200 vessels in total, and we produce about 770,000 tons of seafood. And if we can build this industry stronger, I believe that we can go beyond the capacity of neighboring countries. And the export volume is worth $800 million. And it has an influence in related industries. And fisheries industries is considered a strategic industry, and food security is the national security. It is defined by many nations, because we have an issue of food security in many countries. But if we can secure food sources in faraway oceans, not in our country, it could be a national strategy. And second, we can exert our presence on the global stage in a non-military way, and in the Pacific Ocean, and in Arctic Sea, and Russian waters, and Falkland, Somalia. We are working in 17 EEZs and some MTCs as well. And we are doing some joint R&D with New Zealand and many other countries. And we have signed 13 agreements for the industries. And our vessels do not stay in one location. They work in country A and they transport the seafood in country B, and they nurture the seafood in country C, and they visit many countries' ports for processing and export. And since 1957, we have made constant efforts, and we have achieved quota finally. And we are maximizing our utilization rate of the overseas fish stock. What does that mean? The overseas fishery is expanding the scope of the fisheries industries in Korea, and it is contributing to the maritime power. I believe that our vessels are a small nation floating in the ocean. They have the Korean national flag. That means that in a non-military way, they are playing a role for Korea to become a maritime powerhouse. And it is leading the maritime governance. Now, I visited a small island country last year, and I hugged the prime minister of the country, and one of the diplomats from Korea said that it gave me a dirty look because he thought it is rude. However, later he asked me how I can do that. The ocean-going vessels can have a non-official diplomacy channel, even before we have an official diplomacy channels. So that's how we worked for a long time. And our work led to official diplomatic ties and making a contribution to the partnership between countries. And as I said, we work around the different countries. That is why sometimes we have to discuss the governance, because we need to deal with the legal aspects of our activities, and we have to discuss the control and conservation measures in different waters. And without overseas fisheries, the Korean government will have limitations in discussing the maritime affairs on the global stage. So I believe that the overseas fisheries industry gave a chance for the Korean government to lead maritime affairs on the global stage, and it is a huge driver for the maritime security. And recently, we are not stopping at fishing in coastal nations. We are strengthening international cooperation through ODA and building a virtuous cycle of ODA and diplomacy. And China is also would like to dominate the global maritime industry, and the same goes for the US and other countries. They rely on the non-military role of the overseas fisheries industry, so it is a national strategic industry for many countries. And let me briefly talk about the maritime science. And these days we are using drones and many other technologies, and our vessels measure the oxygen level and water depths and water temperature and fish stock movement, and we can do the real-time monitoring. And in the Antarctic area, they are half research vessels because they can analyze the genetic aspects of the fish stock, and they share the data with the international community, and they are making a contribution to the marine ecosystem development globally. So our job is like a diplomat and a scientist at the same time. And we have to comply with, we have to do many work, not only the fishing itself, but also the repair and maintenance, which also contributing to the scientific development of the industry. and we are not competing against the vessels working in the near sea, and we are competing against the global companies because we need financial and administrative support. We are not protected because we work in the faraway ocean. However, the US and Europe, these dominant nations, they have government support in huge scale, and to compete against them, we need government support in terms of taxation for companies, and they sacrifice themselves far away from families and friends, and sometimes they are forced to speak English, and they have to comply with the rules and regulations of different countries because we have to provide a proper taxation. And let me mention one more thing. And in 1957, I sometimes think how we initiated our first voyage to the Atlantic Ocean. So I looked at the record. They visited many ports in the process because they didn't have food. And one of them had to give up the journey in the middle because of the disease. However, that was the passion which built the foundation for the maritime power of today. So I would like to thank them, and I would like to thank you.
네,
Thank you, Ms. Shin. So you talked about the multiple functions of the remote sea fishing vessels, and I think it's the first time we were able to hear about this, that regarding security, maritime security, technology development, diplomatic functions. So you talked about the multiple roles that are assumed by these vessels, and I think it is just impressive. And the remote sea fishing vessels, first of all, they catch fish and supply fish to the Korean Peninsula, and you assume a lot of roles. So big hands to those fishermen. And next, I would like to pass on the mic to Mr. Kyujong Choi of Koshipa. So could you tell us what's happening in the plants, the ship plants, and what impact you have on the maritime powers? So thank you, first of all, for the invitation, and thank you, presenters, for your presentation. Actually, in the next room, they are talking about the shipping industries, and there was a discussion about MASCA and the shipping industry. So I basically want to cover three things today. So one is the economic power and maritime power. Second is a maritime powerhouse and the shipping powerhouse. And third, I want to talk about the shipping industry. So when we talk about sea power, before it used to mean the military power. And in order to, because if we wanted to influence neighboring countries over the sea, we needed to have military power. But the thing is that military forces require a lot of resources. And in case of these military vessels, it requires a lot of investment to make and also operate. And in the case of these military vessels, it requires about 18 trillion won. And also the annual maintenance cost is about 1 trillion won per year. And you need at least like 5,000 onboard sailors. And according to the law in the United States are required by law to maintain 11 military vessels, including submarines and the carrier vessels, in order to maintain their position as the superpower. And just for your reference, Korea's this year's military budget was 60 trillion won. So when we talk about sea power, we have to think about these two aspects. So considering the economic power of the Korean economy, how much are the taxpayers willing to pay to enhance the sea power in terms of military power? And also, if there is like an agreement, a national agreement, then what is the essence of the sea power strategy of Korea? And in the third presentation, we have heard about how Japan is approaching the East Sea and also how China is approaching the West Sea and how our third parties are approaching the Korean seas and how, so we have to decide whether the Korean Navy, their main purpose is to deter those countries, or whether is the strategy of the Korean Navy is to expand its powers to the wider seas. So I think there has to be some national consensus about what is the purpose or the vision of the Korean military in the seas. And next, I would like to talk about shipbuilding and the sea power. So it was briefly mentioned in the previous presentation, and after the times of the great exploration in the 15th centuries, it was Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, the UK, and the US during the times of the worldwide war. So these were the countries that actually led the leadership, had the leadership on the oceans. And at the times, those respective countries were the superpowers of the world. So in Northeast Asia, Japan once had the leadership, and once it was Korea that had the hegemony. And then now China is tending to leading the leadership. And if you look at the whole history, Korea, there were hardly any times where Korea was a superpower in terms of the sea power in this Northeast Asian region. So then, I mean, it is the era of Pax Americana. And is there really a point in spending so much money in military power? And I think investing in other areas like shipping probably is what led Korea to increase its economic power. And if any war is to be engaged in the seas, then the vessels are the arms. You know, people say that the who wins in the warfare is determined actually is at the plants. Because so whether a country has a shipyard and what kind of vessels are developed and constructed in those shipyards determines the level of power the country has. So think about Greece, think about Denmark, France, Switzerland. The European countries are still strong sea powerhouses, although they don't build ships anymore because they have the IMO and they lead the maritime discussions. If any geopolitical issues are to arise in the future, I think having a shipyard and a ship construction capacity inside the country will be an important factor whether a country can survive or not. As of last year, in terms of order books and of commercial vessels, China actually took up 70% of the total market share. Korea had 17%, and Japan had about 5% of the market share. as of last year in terms of commercial vessel order book. And I think this is worrisome. Shipbuilding is an important fundamental industry of Korea, and I think our minimal market share in this market is very worrisome, especially thinking about the heightening competition between China and the US. And also, there were cases where Chinese vessels were under investigation last year, and also the US is approaching Moscow with the US so that they could enhance their shipbuilding capabilities. And US said it will levy some charges to the Chinese vessels entering US ports, and China also issued similar counteracting measures. So there's a lot of things happening in the international maritime affairs, and there are a lot of issues that may affect Korea's trade policies, diplomatic policies, security policies, political policies, maritime policies. So I think we are at a very important juncture, and I believe that the shipbuilding and the shipping industries can play a big role in overcoming those challenges. Thank you.
네, 네, 부회장님.
Thank you very much, Mr. Che. He emphasized the three issues, especially at the end. He focused on the latest trend about the Korean shipbuilding industry, which is doing a great job. So we have a limited time, so I'm going to invite President Kim of the Korean Marine Officers Association. And you can talk about the impact and influence of marine officers on the maritime power of Korea. Thank you very much. My name is Kim Jong-tae from the Korea Marine Officers Association. I kept looking at the clock, and I don't have much time for my discussion, so let me be brief. And when we discuss the maritime power, so when I listen to all three presentations, and I would like to add one thing to their presentation. So we have shipping and shipbuilding, but I believe that the most important thing is the public interest in the maritime industry. And Korean people tend to neglect the seas and oceans, and that is the Korean culture. So we have to change that so that we can attract talent to the maritime industries and build an even stronger maritime power in this country. And regarding marine officers, let me talk about how it is related to the maritime power. So I will give you two stories. In the First and Second World War, the British merchant fleet lost 1,400 ships, and more than 40,000 crew members died in the sea. And the same goes for Japan. More than 2,000 merchant ships have sunk, and more than 60,000 people died, and which is much larger than the death toll of the Japanese Navy. And I would like to give this comment to Mr. Lee. And there was a war between the UK and Argentina in the past, and from the UK to Argentina, Portland, it was 12,000 kilometer, and from Argentina to Portland, it was 2,000 kilometer. And the UK mobilized 1,500 Marine officers and mobilized 62 merchant ships right away. However, in case of Argentina, they only had crew members working in the coastal areas. And this kind of logistics determined the fate of two nations. And I would like to validate this story with Mr. Lee later. And let me give you a story of the US. So they have academies for the Army and Navy and Air Force, and they have the same academy for Marine officers. And they provide free of charge education. And without this kind of education, Korea might be in trouble mobilizing proper human resources. And we talked about energy security, which encompasses crude oil and LNG and gas. How much stock do we have right now? So during the war, foreign people are foreign people going to enter the Korean ports during the war? We have to think about this seriously. And when I was attending university, I was an ROTC member of the Navy. But the world has changed. But now the organization and structure have changed. And when we combine the period of reserve forces, the total work period is 11 years. And when I was in ROTC, the reserve force age was up to 45 to 50. However, today it is different. So with the merchant ship reserve force system, we cannot mobilize that many people. So during the wartime, how much human resources and vessels can we mobilize? I believe this question should be reconsidered so that we can get prepared for the potential unexpected events. So at the end of the day, the US mentioned Muscat for the shipbuilding industry, and the merchant fleet of the US has allocated 250 active vessels, and they would like to nurture human resources for the vessels. And the US GDP per capita is $90,000. However, it is extremely hard to nurture 10,000 Marine officers, and no country has done so. Korea couldn't do it, and the United Kingdom is declining in its influence in terms of training and nurturing Marine officers. And the same goes for Japan. And the government should nurture Marine officers in a strategic manner with the government budget. That's how we can lead the international order in Northeast Asia. That is why we have to build a system of strategic Marine officers. And as Professor Lee said, we need an organization which can encompass the private sector and the Navy at the same time. Thank you very much.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you. I think that is a very good recommendation. And so there was a question for Mr. An.
예, 전담 기구에 대한 것.
It was about the donation. So integrated control tower I don't think of any particular example. However, Singapore has Maritime and Port Authority, which manages that aspect. In particular, not only the organization itself, they work with the political leaders and government officials who provide support with high interest. And people with experiences in the private sector are elected to work for the organization, and they host multiple events to raise awareness. And in case of Greece, they have the Minister of Shipping Industries. And that minister is exposed to the media frequently, and he's one of the well-known figures in the country. So the public has high interest. That is why it is possible. So in Korea, maybe we can install the same dedicated organization under the presidential office so that it can work with related ministries. So we can utilize the existing organizations. Maybe we can build a maritime power development task force. They can have one or two meetings annually where ministers and vice ministers gather together, and they can collect intelligence and opinions together. And I wish that the president of Korea would be interested in it. And every year, the Prime Minister's office hosts an event for overseas Koreans, and this kind of attention garnering event will be very crucial.
분 질문 좀.
So I would like to take a couple of questions from the floor. We have about 3 minutes left. Do we have any questions? So I would like to take one question, maybe two. Well, if not, then Professor Lee, is there anything that you would like to add? Well, you talked about the dedicated organization, and that was also part of my recommendation in my presentation too. So we all know that sea power is important, and we all know that we need to strengthen the sea power. But then I have a question about how serious the government thinks about this. Because if they think this is really important, if they really want to win in this area, we need to have set up a dedicated organization. Of course, the Policy Coordination Office may do that, but the current level of engagement is not enough. We need to have an organization dedicated, set up under the president, that have the right level of understanding of what's happening in the seas, and it needs to have the right level of power and authority. So that is why we need to have a dedicated organization set up for this purpose. And I agree about that. The maritime technician development, I fully agree with what you said. Mr. Kim, I think we do need to have the maritime officers, the ship officers developed in Korea. It's very important. And I hope that could also be covered in the legal discussions too. I think full support needs to be provided so that we could develop ship officers. Thank you very much. So if we don't have any additional question from the floor, then I, as the moderator, would like to summarize and finish and close the session. So we've had 3 great presentations. So we need to have the naval power strengthened, and we've had some great benchmarks quoted in that regard. And also Mr. An, based on his experience as a diplomat, he gave us a really good and easy, insightful presentation about what we need to do. I think that presentation deck would be very helpful for us. And also, we've had some additional recommendations made by Mr. Yang. So because of security issues, the presentation that cannot be shared. But if you have any questions, I'm sure you could ask Mr. Yang directly. And also, we've had some great panelists presentations about the need to develop ship officers and the remote sea fishing and shipbuilding industries. So I was able to agree with most all the things that were said. So now, we would like to close the International Oceans Politics session in the World Ocean Forum 2025 with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we talked about the importance of sea power, and we also talked about the need to set up a strong, dedicated organization. So let's all give a big round of applause to the moderator, the three speakers, and also the panelists. Okay, so with the photos, we would like to conclude the morning session of the 90th Ocean Forum. So please enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back at 1:30 with the Busan City special session. I'll meet you at 1:30. Thank you very much.